When does the compassionate act of relieving suffering cross the line into the forbidden act of taking a life? It's honestly one of the most profound and personal ethical questions we face, sitting right at that crossroads of medicine, personal freedom, and, well, what it even means to be a humane society. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into the ethics of euthanasia, or as it's often called, mercy killing.
All right, so here's our game plan. We'll start by trying to figure out what a good death even is. Then we'll jump into the two big arguments at the heart of the whole debate, the argument for it, from mercy, and the argument against it, from the sanctity of life. We'll even see what some major philosophers have to say before we wrap up with the really personal question of human dignity.
Okay, first things first. If we're going to have a real discussion about this, we have to be on the same page with the words we're using. The whole debate really hinges on what we mean by some key terms, starting with the word euthanasia itself.
So the word itself actually comes from Greek for good death. Right from its origin, the goal sounds compassionate, right? A peaceful, painless end. But in modern bioethics, it's not that simple. It's specifically about the intentional act of ending a life to stop terrible suffering, and that leads to some really important distinction.
And this is the first huge fork in the road for this debate. Is there really a moral difference between active euthanasia, where someone takes a direct action like giving a lethal drug, and passive euthanasia, where you just withhold treatment and let nature take its course? This single distinction is absolutely central to the whole ethical puzzle.
So let's explore the main argument for euthanasia. People often call this the argument for mercy. And it's an argument that's not based in some abstract theory, but in the raw, very real experience of human suffering and our desire to do something about it.
For people who support euthanasia, this isn't some hypothetical choice. It's a direct response to absolutely awful conditions. We're talking about unbearable physical pain that medicine just can't touch, constant sickness, the crushing weight of depression, and this profound fear of losing all control, all dignity, and all independence.
And this quote pretty much sums it up. The argument for mercy says that when a disease gets to a point where life is just a container for constant, meaningless pain, then forcing that life to continue, well, that's not kindness. In those really tragic cases, they argue that a chosen death is actually the most merciful option on the table.
Now, this idea of mercy is tied directly to a huge philosophical principle: autonomy. It's the belief that you, as a competent adult, have the fundamental right to make decisions about your own body and your own life. And proponents say that right has to include the final decision about when and how you want to end your own suffering.
But, and this is a really big but, there is a powerful and deeply held set of arguments on the other side. And for a lot of people, these counter-arguments start with the most basic promise in all of medicine:
the Hippocratic Oath. This ancient promise creates a massive conflict for doctors. I mean, their entire job, their ethical duty, has always been to preserve life, to heal, not to end it. So the idea of a physician becoming an agent of death, even for merciful reasons, just feels like a complete violation of that sacred trust.
And right there, that's the core dilemma. The old saying, first do no harm, suddenly gets really complicated. What does do no harm actually mean when your treatments aren't healing anymore, but are just dragging out a state of horrible suffering? In that situation, could keeping the body alive technically be causing the greater harm?
Opponents also bring up this huge concern, which you've probably heard of: the slippery slope. The fear is, if you open the door to euthanasia, even just a tiny crack for the most extreme cases, that door will just keep getting pushed wider. The rules could go from helping the terminally ill to the chronically ill, maybe even to people with mental illness. It could erode our basic respect for life and put the most vulnerable people at risk.
What's so fascinating is that these two opposing views aren't just based on emotion or gut feelings. They're actually built on centuries of philosophical thought that give us real frameworks for thinking about what's right and what's wrong.
And academic work, like the paper you see here, is what helps us dissect these principles. This kind of inquiry is what takes the conversation from being purely emotional to a really structured analysis of our deepest moral beliefs.
So on one side, you have a view called deontology, which is famously linked to Immanuel Kant. For a deontologist, some things are just right or wrong, period. The consequences don't matter. Ending a human life breaks a universal rule, so it's always wrong. But then on the other side, you have utilitarianism, championed by people like Peter Singer. For a utilitarian, it's all about the consequences. The most ethical choice is whatever leads to the best outcome, which in this case would be minimizing suffering.
All of which brings us to the final, and maybe the most personal, piece of this whole puzzle.
It's about what it actually means to live and to die with dignity, and how we're supposed to balance our own personal autonomy against the values society places on every life.
This is such a powerful way to think about it. Is your right to autonomy a shield, meaning you have the right to be left alone, to say no to treatment and let death happen naturally? Or is it a sword, meaning you have the right to demand action from other people, to get help in actively ending your life to stop the pain? Almost everyone agrees we have the shield, but the sword, well, that's one of the biggest ethical battles of our time.
So you see, at the end of the day, this isn't a debate with some easy answer. We are left with this profound tension between two core values that sometimes clash. On one hand, you have this incredibly powerful pole of compassion for the person suffering right in front of you. And on the other, you have this foundational duty as a society to protect all life, especially the most vulnerable.
And so we don't end with an answer. We end with the question that is right at the heart of this entire debate. It's a question that challenges our laws, our doctors, and our own personal beliefs. How do we, as a society, walk that razor's edge between mercy and protection? That's a question every single one of us has to grapple with for ourselves.